Let me start by saying I didn't used to believe in ghosts or stuff like that, but after the experience I had, I have massively changed my opinion on that. The things I heard and saw that day went a long way to changing my mind. I was in Pittsburgh on a mini vacation and decided to visit the National Aviary west of downtown. It's in a park surrounded by a beautiful neighborhood. Well, I got there and dumb old me didn't check the web, and the aviary was closed for the day, so I was forced to wander the park around the place. I could look through the fence and see some incredibly large and weird-looking condors. I'd hate to have one of those things fly at me, that's for sure. I read up on the history of the aviary and park, and this sounded a bit like it was cursed to me. The plot upon which the National Aviary now sits originally was part of the land that once sat under Western State Penitentiary, built in 1826, and was torn down in 1882. During the Civil War, 118 Confederate soldiers and officers that were captured from the Morgan's Raid attack that happened just a few miles from Pittsburgh were held there from 1863 to 1864. Prisons at that time were medieval places. I can't imagine the kind of horrors that went on inside the walls of that place. After the prison was torn down, the people of Pittsburgh had a plant conservatory built on the empty lands, but it burned down in the late 1920s. This place was really sounding cursed to me. As I was reading, I heard a clanging noise from inside the fence. The place looked empty to me, so I was wondering what the heck it could be. The birds seemed somewhat upset by these sounds. The banging was intermittent. It sounded like somebody beating on metal bars, maybe trying to escape. I backed off from the building and scanned the area. Suddenly, the doors on the building burst open and a woman came out looking very afraid. She looked like a cleaning lady. She slammed the door behind her and walked away from the entrance very quickly, glancing back over her shoulder. I stopped her briefly and she looked very pale. I asked her what the sound was, and she said that the old radio in the kitchen just kept going on and off with nobody around it. And then the clanging started. I said that sounded strange to me. I went on to ask if she knew what the banging was. She said she saw an ominous shadow outside, and that's when she decided to leave because she was supposed to be the only person in the building that day. The clanging started again and her eyes went wide. She pulled away from me and rushed off. I waited a bit and the banging stopped. I looked back at the building and I saw a weird shape inside the fence. It hovered inside as if it were looking at me. It was truly unnerving, and I backed away slowly as I didn't want to stop looking at this shape. Then a terrifying scream came from the grounds. Like somebody was in great pain. At this point, I knew it was time to go. I moved away from the building and stopped 100 feet away. I scanned the building and saw nothing. Then I looked into the park and I saw ghostly shapes. They stood looking at the aviary. Then a strange moaning filled the air. Now it was time to run. I made a dash for my car and drove out of the park as quickly as possible. The moaning felt like it was inside my head. When I cleared the park, it stopped. I had to stop at a stop sign and I looked back, and everything looked normal again. But I knew for me, it would never be that way again. I'm a little claustrophobic, so when somebody said, let's go check out the abandoned factory and tunnels at Deadman's Hollow near Pittsburgh, I felt my stomach tighten a little bit, but I didn't want to let anybody know. I didn't like tight spaces, so I just agreed to go along. I'd heard about these tunnels for a long time, and there were all kinds of crazy stories spread about them. People died in them, people were murdered in them. Some people went in and never came out. I thought it was all ball, but I was still a little wary. We had a 20 or so minute drive getting to the nature reserve and got turned around a couple times, but we eventually made it in one piece. The map we had showed we had a decent hike to get to the tunnels and the ruins, so we took off as soon as we parked. The path led down a hill through woods and ridges in the hills. We crossed a bridge over a small stream, and in a few minutes we reached the ruins of the abandoned factory. Its concrete skeleton poked out of the woods, with vines and bushes growing around it. I wanted to check them out, but we heard thunder, so we decided to split up, and my group got to check out the tunnels. I didn't put up an argument, but I was not happy. We reached the culvert that led to the tunnel opening. It looked like it was designed as a way to take drainage away from the factory. My friend said he wanted to see if he could find another opening at the river end. I put up a short debate, but he took off before I could get much said. Great. I had to explore this dark tunnel by myself. I mustered up my courage and entered the tunnel. It was musty and smelled like mold and mud. I could see it went on for a while. There was a break 100 or so feet down the way, so that took a little of my fear away. At least it looked like there was a way out if I needed it. I slogged along with just my cell phone flashlight for a light, dodging muddy puddles, rocks, and broken clay pipes that I guessed came from the old factory. The tunnel felt like it was closing in slightly the deeper I got in. My breathing rate increased and I fought my claustrophobia. I was about 70 feet in when I heard a sound. It was a clunk followed by a splash, kind of like a foot stepping in a puddle. I held my ground and scanned the darkness, but the light from my phone barely made it past a few feet. I spun and couldn't see anybody behind me, thinking my friend had given up and decided to follow me. The tunnel was empty. I could see there was a break in the tunnel ahead, and I restarted my trek towards it. Then I heard more sounds like footsteps echoing off the tunnel walls that weren't my own. I walked and spun, looking for the source of the sound, but I could see nothing. The slimy walls, mud, and broken junk spread on the floor of the tunnel, but I saw no signs of anybody there. Then, I swear I heard a low moan. It sent a cold spike of fear straight in my gut. I sped up and reached the break, thinking I could climb out, but when I got to the hole, the sides were too steep and dangerous to scale. I did feel a little my fear abate at seeing light, though. But then I heard the moan again, and after a moment I heard the footsteps. They were getting closer, but I couldn't see anything moving. Maybe there was a side tunnel and something was coming towards my location. I just knew I couldn't stay where I was. I walked as fast as I could in the darkness, around the bend, and finally I could see a spot of light that looked like the opening toward the river. It looked like it was a mile away, but it couldn't have been more than 100 feet or so. My heart started to pound. The moaning sounds grew and I was near a full run, but had to be careful because I knew if I sprained or broke my ankle, I would never get out of this damn hole. The moaning sounds seemed to surround me. The light at the end called me, but my throat seemed to be closing, making my breathing labored. I made one last push and burst into the light of day by a small river, breathing heavily with my hands on my knees. I must have been there for a few minutes before stabilizing my breathing. Once I was better, I realized I needed to get back to my group, and there was no way I was going back into that tunnel. I had to scale this steep hill, grabbing roots to keep from sliding back down, and one of the roots I reached for ended up being a snake which slithered past my feet. I let out a little yelp and climbed faster. I ended up on flat ground and made it back to the ruins where my friends were laughing and hanging out. They asked why I was so pale, and I just said I was winded. I asked the guy who split off from me where he'd gone, and he said he'd gotten lost and eventually doubled back. They asked if the tunnels were cool, and I stumbled out that it may be full of snakes and there was no way I was going back in there. I didn't mention the moaning or the footsteps. As we left, we swung by the culvert and I looked into the dark tunnel, and I could swear I heard the low moan again. I spun and walked away without looking back. Pittsburgh, because it's at the confluence of three rivers, has a lot of bridges. I was in town to see the Pirates game and explore the city. It's a great old city with great architecture and many attractions. And as I said, it has a lot of bridges, and I had one of the weirder experiences on one of Pittsburgh's bridges. The Pirates game was a blowout, so I left a bit early and headed across the Roberto Clemente Bridge, formerly known as the 6th Street Bridge, toward Pittsburgh's downtown. The bridge is closed to vehicle traffic on game day, so I could walk anywhere on it. It was fairly deserted, and for stretches I was on it all by myself. It had a fantastic view of the city and the ballpark. I was making my way across the bridge, taking some photos of the skyline, when about halfway across, I got one of those bad feelings that comes to you like a sixth sense when a chill runs up your spine and your stomach runs cold. This could be baked into humans going back to the caveman as a survival instinct. I looked in front of me and I couldn't see anything, but when I turned around, I saw a shape behind me. It was just standing there, stock still, looking my direction. I held my ground trying to make out any features, but it was just too far away. The shape held its ground too. I yelled out to the shape, asking if there's anything I could do for them, and I got no response. They just stood there, seemingly staring at me. Maybe it was too far away and they couldn't hear me, or they were deaf, but the way they were staring at me totally creeped me out. I decided to keep heading for the city and spun around. I moved at a pretty good clip, trying not to think of the strange shape that was staring at my back. I walked for several seconds and I couldn't help but look back, and there was the shape, standing stock still. It appeared to be closer to me this time, but they would have had to have been almost running to close that distance. I began what I could call a fast walk or slow jog, huffing and puffing a little to reach the city side of the bridge. I glanced back and the strange shape was still there, like some silent sentinel, but a whole lot more scary. It was time to run, and I dashed the last 100 feet or so and reached the city side of the river. I spun back and now saw the bridge was empty. The shape was gone. I was left there breathing hard and wondering what the hell happened. I would do some research on Pittsburgh's bridges, and there were many tragedies and stories and deaths associated with them, but none to that specific bridge. It could have been some creeper, I guess, or maybe the ghosts were just branching out. I just know from now on I plan on going to day games when I go to Pittsburgh.